Because we moved into the neighborhood, I'm sure that's what my dad was looking at, somewhere for us to partake. I lived 3 blocks from here down by the tennis courts growing up. My first memory has a little, maybe 3 or 4-year-old, probably 4-year-old. There was no childcare. So when my mom was curling, and curling for ladies was huge, huge. And there were a group of us as children, and in those days you were seen and not heard. And we would play on the boardwalk while the ladies were curling. And that's my memory of the initial, time here, was coming over with my mom and watching her curl. Probably pretty quickly after that, I did skate. I always thought that I didn't skate for many years because my parents couldn't afford it. Apparently, I didn't skate very long because I cried because the ice rinks were so cold. And they'd have us in these little outfits and you just would freeze. And we did do one show at the Stampede Corral. And I remember just dying of being frozen. And I was a very skinny kid. Well, badminton was a big one. Chanarong, well, Jim Powell initially. Chanarong was, you had to be with Chan, even though he had just come to Canada, was just learning English, but you knew when he was happy or not. And you listened. And during that time, when I came over, and I would have been in grade 4, 5, and 6, we walked over by ourselves. No parents in the hallways between 4 and 6, absolutely no parents. So it was the coaches and the children. And we were all in matching white. We all had our Glencoe shirt. I remember the wooden rackets. Going to the locker room all by myself, opening my own locker, all those things. No parents were around, so we learned independence pretty quick. I mean, the outdoor pool was to die for in the summer times. And, the big garage doors of the pool, and in the indoor pool, all the glass on the backside, heading west. It was an amazing time to swim. I actually wore nose plugs, and they had those ones, that were attached and around. And we all had those bathing caps that, might have a flower on it or whatever. But I found I sneezed anytime I was in the chlorine. But I loved swimming. And one of my best friends at the time, Sandy Safton, would arrive at school with green hair and wet, and she was on the swim club. Baywatch was the reason. I loved Baywatch. And part of it was, I admired all my friends that were amazing swimmers, the Fullertons and the Wiggums and Saftons. And I always thought, wow, I'd love to be a swimmer like that. But I also knew I loved all these other sports, and I didn't want to just specifically swim. But when I went to university, that's when I realized that swimming was a passion. Loved it. So I took a year-long course. We learned all the biomechanics of swimming. And we did our lifeguards at the time, teaching. We trained at University of Alberta, we trained under Dr. Murray Smith, and his children swam for Canada. And then Murray Smith went over to Australia and helped all the coaches there, and that's why Australia became such a strong force. Yeah, I loved the swimming here. We weren't allowed to play squash till 1971 as women. I was at Western, and Phil Matati came up to me, and Phil, was a North American hardball champ in squash. And he said that he had heard that they were going to let girls and women play squash. he handed me a racket, they're only about this size and wooden and a ball. Go try it. So I remember I booked a court with Sue Shuley, then Sue Scott, and we walked up the hill from Western, came over at lunchtime, and we went to the courts, knocked on the door, and in those days they were dungeon style, no airflow, with a little slit. And we'd look through the slit, to see if anybody's on the court. And I just remember the door opening and these two fellows coming out, girls don't play, and kind of going, well, I guess today's the day. We get to. And Ian Payton went by and said to Sue and I, yes, it's Wednesday and Friday you're in a tournament. I mean, we played a lot of badminton and tennis. And what I found in squash is a lot of the badminton shots that Janet taught us worked amazingly in squash. Overhead shots, drop, anything. So yeah, that was the beginning. So Sue and I, we were the first two Glencoe gals, and the other 4 participants in this tournament were professors from the University of Calgary. And they were in their 30s. Sue and I were 16. Golf was isolated to married women at clubs, but even in Calgary at the time when the Glencoe Golf Course purchased the property, the club was thinking that's how they should run it initially. And I remember going up to Ray and saying, okay, so single women can join? Absolutely. So they actually opened the door for us. And I was one of the first, along with Barb Alexander, and I don't think Janet Simpson joined, Donna Silverson. We were one of the first few going, wow, this is amazing. Because the other courses you could not belong unless you were married. When I went to University of Alberta and graduated with my Bachelor of Physical Education, it was the first time that the university started going into specializing in coaching, in dance, in adaptive phys ed, in administration. And nothing was out there for private fitness. Everything was either a sport. You could be a runner, but you go play field hockey, you go soccer, you go play tennis. And even at the club here, it was sport related. And so when I was at university, I remember thinking, gosh, this is the time when participation was just happening. We were being insulted as Canadians that our 60-year-old men were, or our 30-year-old men were not as fit as 60-year-old, for example, Swedes or other countries. And so the government started pushing for fitness and anything. And I was also a dance major. I loved to dance at university. And Jane Fonda was starting to be a big thing in the States. And I started because I always knew I wanted to be here at the Glencoe. Helen Vandenberg had already been here with Angela Mosca and Nevenka Desvich, and they were really paving the ways. But it was women only teaching at the time, which was really interesting. The men were doing more, the weight training and that side of it, and the coaching, but they weren't doing the dance or the fitness side of it in terms of aerobics. We did have a men's only fitness class because at the Glencoe in the 70s, men only could participate in anything at the club at noon. Women weren't. They had the mornings off. They were wives at home, or in the evening you'd come and play. But now, no. And I had to ask permission. I remember I went to Ray. I said, I have someone who has approached me, Sheila Wares. She would like to join the men's noon fitness because that's the time that works for her. She is corporate. She works corporately, so she would like that. And so Sheila was one of the first ones, but Ray said, make sure she wears shorts. None of this Jane Fonda look. So, that was sort of the start of me realizing that I had an opportunity to help people in a variety of ways. Well, prior to that, I was actually down in the Maritimes. I was living in Halifax. I had graduated from U of A and followed a boy down to Halifax and was big into sort of a medical approach to getting people better. And what I realized was that the medical approach, primarily through surgery, was what the medical field felt was the answer. And I remember approaching, because I was a research fellow, I approached the physician I was working for and I said, but aren't you going to have them warm up before the surgery and have, post exercises? And a lot of times they didn't do that. So I felt I had purpose. And I lived around the corner also from a high rise of seniors. And so I started teaching chair exercises. And I did children's programs at the IWK Children's Hospital for adaptive physical education. So I was really keen on activity for all ages. I was coaching Special Olympics, track and field, let's just move, let's just go and, every age, every size. I brought it back only because it was the only time my dad phoned and said, young lady, come back and get a real job. Because what had happened was my research dollars had run out. And I started falling in love with what I've always enjoyed, fiber art. And I was a weaving apprentice for a lady in Tantallon, which is close to Peggy's Cove. And I'd go out there on weekends. And she offered me this job. I was so excited I was going to stay and do that. And I remember writing home. In those days, you wrote letters. And I wrote home and my dad said, young lady, come home. You got a degree. You need to figure something out. And I'd been trying actually to get on at the Children's Hospital here for years. And it was really hard to get on, to do adaptive physical education. Anyway, I ended up getting a job because Helen started Heavens. And I applied for the position and Ray Brett gave me my first job here. Well, I wasn't the fitness director, no, Angela Mosca was, but I was ahead of creating programs for children. So I started a lot of the children's programs for seniors because the age group that was coming was primarily 30 to 50, and we wanted more, of the seniors to benefit from this. A lot of the 60-year-olds had never done weights before, of the men. I think of the Ernie Dunlops, that by the time, and the Paul Poffenroths, look at their physiques and what they did. And they started off with the Nautilus machines that were in the storage room of the Pro Shop Now, location. We had 10 or 12 machines and that was it. That was the start of our weight room, really. The girls' locker room. When Ethel was there, but also just the independence of knowing I could go to my locker, and if I was playing badminton, we'd get in our whites, and I'd have my wooden racket that you'd had to unscrew, the brace on it, and just the independence. But of course, always bowling. Because on a Friday night, Claire Wilson and I, now Claire Paulson, she and I played badminton ladder. And in between games, we'd go up and bowl and then come back down. And right before the badminton too, we'd always come early because we were watching someone very special that we both adored. Jamie Paulson. He was training. And Claire and I just admired him so much. And, a lot of the athletes, like Jamie, the abilities that they showed, how hard they would work for something. And of course, he was doing very well and traveling with General and going to the Commonwealth Games and all these things. So anyway, there was that Claire and I. The fan club, yeah. The curling right from, when I was little, and just before my mom passed, she and I curled together. Daniel, when he was little, I wanted Brett Waldorf to start a program for the children when they were really young. He says, oh, they're too young. And I go, if you don't do it now, you'll lose them. So I had Daniel on the ice, and he actually used to come over and sweep for my dad's team, men's night, average age 75. And there's Daniel, would have been about 10 or 12. And then Friday nights, we ended up curling with my mom and dad too. Daniel and I and my mom and dad, yeah. And then my sister loved curling. She curled a lot, but I didn't do the high school curling because there was a big group, the Horans, Tamagi's. I know my sister did it. I can't remember who her friends were that were doing it, but I never really came to curling until after I lived in the Maritimes. I lived around the corner from the oldest curling club in Canada. Every Tuesday I would curl in their league, and we'd stay around for homemade fish and chips wrapped in the London Times and have lemon meringue pie, homemade, and a moose head or an Olen beer. And then I got asked to compete, and a group of us mixed. We went all over the Maritimes, and I won my first set of dishes. I mean, in those days, you won dishes or blankets or whatever. And I just remember Colleen Jones was a junior, and she'd be on the next ice practicing, and it was really exciting, She was getting ready to do all of her competing and representing Nova Scotia. So I didn't curl until I came back from the Maritimes. Well, I think too, the club has to come back to where it was when I was growing up. There was a lot of socializing. Every event had a dance after. Every event had a party after. And so you always met people. If you look in the hallway at the pictures of the opening of the tennis courts, everyone's in long dresses. They're all dressed up. Even I could see my brother David in the picture with his afro, he's in that picture too. But we always had parties after every event we did. And dancing was a big thing at the club here. So then you learn to socialize. They used to have a live band every night. Every night. Maybe not Monday nights, but yeah, we had the same band and they played, and then they'd have the Stampede Shindigs. But even now when I'm with people, I just say, sign up for something. You never know. You don't have to be good at it. You just have to want to learn. Go and have fun with it. And I have a diversified group of friends because I really enjoy people. I like that diversity. You never get bored. You really don't. And it is interesting in some ways how some of the sports connect, and how some of the sports, you'll have someone that's just wanting that one sport and they make it super special. I mean, I think of Danny Shannon, He's a prime example of someone who has done every sport. He loves every sport. He brings the party side to the sport too. And to me, that's an example of, just get involved. One of them, and I'll use the name because he would be proud if he was alive and he heard his name. So we used to do underwater weighing, and it used to be in the office of the now badminton office at the back. And it was basically a water tank. And we would do underwater weighing testing because fitness testing was a big thing. We did, the sit and reach and, the aerobic and everything. So I remember Dr. Crosland, he was a cardiologist at the Holy. He said, yeah, I'll meet you there at 8 o'clock. So I open the door, get everything ready, and he walks in. Okay, I'm ready. And he literally just dropped everything, butt naked. And I go, okay, Laurie, it's okay. This is very professional. This is anatomy. It's okay. And I mean, it didn't bother me. I had 4 brothers, you know, it's just anatomy. But it was just the part of it. And Dr. Crosman was just a nice, natural man. It just didn't bother him either. I've had some very special moments here at the club, and I think that's why I hope I'm not finished, because if you're not present and you're not here, you won't get to meet the next person or the generations of children. For example, I'm working in child minding right now, and the other day I got to hold a 10-week-old baby, Louis Inlow, Travis Inlow's new babe, Jane Inlow's grandson. I mean, how special is that? And an honor too. And knowing all the generations going through it, you know. I mean, I knew Nancy Hezemeyer. She grew up on Elbow Drive, you know. They all went to Western, you know. And then Shane went to school with my brother, Randy, med school. You know, so the connections are just unbelievable. There's always a connection to somebody. I was at a knitting group with grannies, and a new gal that I hadn't met on Tuesday, we started talking, and all of a sudden, Glencoe. And she knew one of our members that had just passed away. So, I mean, it's such a small world. Such a small world. And the fitness industry is never ending. It really doesn't matter what a person does to become well. What's important is to be with people. Whether you're sitting talking with them, you can become well with that. Go for a walk, learn a new skill, listen to music, do yoga, you know, that's what I found with fitness. I'm so glad that I decided to go into this field and not go into exercise physiology or possibly medicine or something like that. This is what's going to heal people.